I am Stacey Powells, and this is This Crazy Life.
I'm Jason Brown, living this crazy life.
You are totally living this crazy life. We are so happy to be here, and we are going to discuss a topic today that isn't necessarily very happy. We are going to talk about grief.
It affects all of us.
It really does affect all of us, and we could be grieving for somebody who's not only passed away, but we can be grieving for somebody who is actually still alive, and that's even more intense sometimes. You were going to talk about C.S. Lewis. You had something you wanted to say then.
The thing that I learned back in school reading C.S. Lewis, he wrote a book called Grief Observed, and it was really about his own life. And he was talking about grief from the perspective of, as time goes on, it becomes easier to deal with. But no matter where you're at in life, you could be at Disneyland, you could be having the greatest time in the world, and out of nowhere, like a bomb drop on you, grief, it hits you again. And you're right back to that moment of that lost loved one. And I've experienced it. I've lost people in my life. And I remember that it just, out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Your brain just clicked. And right back at the moment of losing your loved one.
Yeah, it does. And we have a special guest today, Lina Lambert. She has agreed to come in here and talk about her grief. She recently lost the love of her life, Jimmy Lambert, who was a well-known musician here in town, very well-loved, not just here in town in Bishop, but also in the Eastern Sierra. And Lina, what bands did he play with? What was he?
He was in several bands. He started with Flashback in the 70s in Mammoth, and they stayed together about 20 years. And as an offshoot from Flashback, a two-man duo evolved, Good Livin', and it was Tom Galt and Jimmy who actually played a couple of popular songs that were used for commercials here. I Like Beer, if anybody remembers that.
Yeah.
And then most recently, he was with Sax Fifth Avenue, which was a saxophone-based rock and roll band.
Didn't they do some stuff in the park?
They did.
Yeah.
They did. They played every festival and stage that you can imagine, from Alancha to Lee Vining. They were famous in their own right in our little area. The Owens Valley Boys.
The Owens Valley Boys. So let's talk about, how did you and Jimmy meet?
We actually met on Match.com, Stacey.
What?
We did.
How come I didn't know that?
What? Yeah, we were both single and looking, and the computer matched us. It said, "Oh, you might like this person," and I waved on the computer thing, and he waved or winked back, and it started from there. And
when was that?
It was in 2007.
Wow.
And we decided to meet. Like, we talked a little bit on the phone, and I said, well, I'm working the Jazz Jubilee. And he said, I'm playing the Jazz Jubilee. I said, well, and he said, I'll come find you. And I'm thinking, yeah, right, a musician's going to come and find me. Right, he did. And he took me to, we met, and it was instant connection, I'll admit it. And he took me to see his band. And he said, come and see my set. I'm like, okay. And I walk in there, and all the people in the room are like, oh, Lina, good to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. And they're hugging me. And he goes, you know these people? I go, you know these people? He says, it's my band. And they were my friends. And we had all this overlap that we didn't know. So they vouched for each of us. And
it took Match.com to bring you together.
I am shocked. I'm shocked, I tell you. I know a lot about you. I didn't even know that was a Match.com thing.
And Jazz Jubilee. Flossie and Ken.
Yeah, Flossie and Ken. Oh my gosh, Flossie and Ken. So you were together for how many years? I mean, before you got married, I mean, you guys were together a long time.
2007, and we got engaged in 2010, and we just stayed engaged.
Okay.
He played a lot of events, and we thought, we have a reception. It's going to be the same people that come. We kind of have a reception and a party every time we play an event, so we would sort of pretend this is our reception and just not tell anybody.
Okay.
We had one after another, but we finally did get married in 2017.
Yeah, you eloped.
We did. I was going to turn 60, and I said, I don't want to be engaged, a fiance when I'm 60. I want to be Mrs. And he said, okay, let's go. And 2 weeks later, we went to Tahoe and just eloped and said, this just happened.
Yeah. Oh, that was so great.
It was 3 months before my 60th birthday.
I was a little twizzed, just a little, because you had kind of said to me, "So you are a wedding officiant, and would you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then all of a sudden but I look at, I understand. I understand.
Regrets, I'll tell you.
I forget.
Regrets. There are regrets, and thank you for forgiving me on that. But there are some regrets. I think in grief and regrets, if you switch those letters around, there's a lot of the same letters in it. And in grief, there are a lot of regrets. And one thing, I underestimated the power of being married. I really enjoyed being Mrs. Lambert, and I don't know why we waited so long.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you were married in 2017?
Correct.
2017. And everything's going fine. I mean, I remember seeing you guys perform at One LA Deli. I mean, you even had the tambourine. You would go up there and do the tambourine with him, and you were his biggest fan. I mean, you were out there and telling everybody where to go. We were always getting text messages from you, sometimes at 3 a.m. And then you were thrown a curveball.
Yeah.
So, and it's okay to cry, all right? I mean, grief is part of crying. So the tissues are right there. Just take a deep breath. So we'll just go real quick. So what caused you guys to go to the doctor?
Jimmy had a cold, and he thought it was a swollen lymph gland and overexerted himself at a New Year's Eve gig. So it was January of 2019. And he had a little swollen lymph node. And he went into the doctor, and they didn't think anything of it, this or that. Took a while to do a test. Let's do a CAT scan, MRI. I don't remember. There's been so much since then.
Yeah.
Anyways, they did a needle biopsy, and it came back that it was a little tumor, is all they called it, a tumor. And no reason to really be alarmed. These things are benign. Kind of get in line to have a surgery, but we don't have anybody here, Owens Valley.
Yeah.
So you have to go either north or south. Where do you want to go? And Jimmy's like, I don't want to go north, south, east, or west. I want to stay right here. But that wasn't a choice. So a lot of research. And we finally picked north and went to Reno, got in line. Surgery was scheduled in June. He had discovered it in January. And finally, through a non-urgency diagnosis, they scheduled it in June. And we had done a lot of research, pretty confident in the doctor.
Yeah.
And then we pack a bag for 2 nights to go to Reno for an overnight for a really simple 4-hour surgery. Complex, they said, but not unusual for a surgeon who does hundreds of these a year. So that's how it started.
Right. And so my understanding is they opened him up and they said, oops, this is more complex than it was. And through a whole bunch of circumstances, a lot of which I think were divine intervention, you were able to get into Stanford. I mean, that was not the plan for a 2-night overnight.
No, I had 2 nights worth of clothes, 3 cats at home, a lot of plants in a garden because it was June. And here we are in Reno being told he's going to be air ambulanced somewhere. We have to find a doctor that can do this. I'll back up a second. When the surgeon went in for the routine surgery and opened him up, he didn't like what he saw. He actually said it was aggressive and angry, which I thought, how does a tumor have feelings and become angry? But that was how it was described. And the surgeon, in his wisdom, divine guidance by the angels, knew enough that it was too complex for him, and he sewed him up and said, we need to go to part 2 of a surgery somewhere else with someone who knows more about this. It was wrapped around his facial nerve and into the vocal cords, which for a singer in a rock and roll band is not a good diagnosis.
Right.
So the urgency was to make sure we could salvage the facial nerve. And so he called, his receptionist called everywhere, and I complained. I can't go to San Francisco. I can't do this. We can't go there. We live in a small area. I had every objection there was, which I didn't realize at the time. I was already in anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
I was grieving what I was anticipating.
Which you didn't know.
Yeah, no problem.
Right.
Yeah. So, stroke of luck, fate, the angels, he called and said, I have a colleague I called, and I was brainstorming what can we do with him, and the colleague said, I have a cancellation next week. I'll get your guy in. And that's how we ended up at Stanford.
Okay. And then that whole thing happened, and that was June 2019?
June 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just briefly, what happened after that? I mean, I remember you had a whole string of girlfriends. We were on your late night calls at 3:00 in the morning. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. And we just couldn't believe. I mean, we could not believe what you two were dealing with. And so just take us through that really, really quick.
We got to Stanford, and I was surprised that we were at such a big center, and through all the dozens of tests, they determined they could take him in, and it ended up being a 13-hour surgery. If you can imagine being under anesthesia for 13 hours.
Can you imagine? I mean,
No.
married. I'm married.
Waiting and the
Wait.
worry.
Yeah. Yeah. And unexpected. Totally unexpected.
Yeah, and like
I
I
don't know
said,
how they handled that.
the girlfriend posse, I had a friend come and sit with me the entire 13 hours. Yeah. And when the doctor came out, I had tried to hug him when we first met him, and he's like, I'm not a hugger. And he came out and he actually hugged me. And he said, I am not a hugger, but I'm hugging you after the 13 hours. And they said it was successful, and they had clear margins, and it was going to be a long haul. And it was. It was a long recovery. 6 days in the hospital, and then we came home and had to travel back and forth to Stanford, which is 20 hours round trip.
Yeah. Wow.
For follow-ups, and then they recommended radiation, so we had to go set up an apartment in Stanford in Palo Alto for 6 weeks while he did radiation. And that's when the 3 a.m. text messages were coming to my friends, which I wanted to tell you. I actually found some.
Why don't you read one?
Pulled them up. This is from you. Please let us know what's up. Tell Jim we are rooting for him, praying for him, telling his angels to surround him with love and light. Tell him Dan and his spoons are awaiting his return. That was from you. After a 3 a.m. text. That was your reply in the morning.
Yeah. By the way, Dan, I call him Spooner Dan. He plays spoons in some bands. Yeah.
Condo spoons.
He's a spooner. He's a spooner guy. So
I wrote back, I'm ready for some spooning. Wink, wink.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So now we are, let's say the radiation is over. Where are we time-wise?
Oh, radiation was over. We got to come back home to the Eastern Sierra. It was September. It was just glorious. It was 3 months. I describe it now as living on a hammock on an island. It's like it was done. It was over. Seemed successful.
And then what?
Recovery. December, we go back for another scan, and they actually said, this is the text that I wrote to everybody December 10th. Hooray, results of the MRI show it's clear and cancer-free. That's actually what they said. Yippee, it's been a crazy day of appointments, but all the medical teams say we are looking good. Whew, praise be to God.
Okay.
And you wrote back, we are so relieved, as a lot of other people did. So that was December. They actually...
December 2019.
December 2019.
Okay, so...
Use the words cancer-free.
Yeah. All right. So we've only got about 11 minutes here. So let's go to when the bomb was dropped.
3 months later, go back for another routine scan. For some reason, they want to look at the lungs. This is on the neck. Why they want to look at the lungs? They look at the lungs. They come in, the entourage of penguins, I called them, in their little outfits, following the main doctor who looked like death warmed over. I'm like, uh-oh. And she started crying because she had gotten to know us really well. And she said, we have spots on the lungs, it's metastasized. Somehow the little boogers sneak through the radiation. Now it's in his lungs. It's inoperable. The worst news you could imagine.
Yeah.
Like, talk about a bomb drop.
And this is like in spring 2020?
March
2020.
March 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, oh, yeah, everything shut down. So, okay, so everything shuts down. And then I believe the two of you somehow found a way to get into Lancaster, City of Hope in Lancaster. And they did whatever they could do. And,
City of Hope was very hopeful. Yeah, a little more hopeful than Stanford had been with the prognosis. They've dealt with this before.
Yeah.
It took a lot of insurance hoops to transfer. We didn't have to travel 20 hours. They allowed Zoom meetings because of the pandemic at that time. And so more radiation, chemotherapy, good news, bad news, good news, bad news. It was a roller coaster.
yeah,
And then in December of 2020, it just went like wildfire is just the best way I can describe it.
yeah.
It was like wildfire. It just, nothing worked anymore. It just didn't matter what you threw at it. Things started growing, and he started feeling worse and worse, and he died in March
March of 2021. Okay.
Yeah, went fast. A year from the long diagnosis.
Yeah.
All right. So your grief through the whole process, is it safe to say that you're grieving, yet you're trying to be strong? You're trying to just be strong for Jimmy. You're just holding it together as much as possible because you're dealing with all the nurses and the insurance and making sure he gets where he's getting, and he's not able to work anymore, and you're not able to work very much anymore. And then he passes away, and now what?
You were there. You remember all that very, very well.
Yeah,
That's
I do.
exactly what it was. I started referring to it and writing it down in my journals as caregiving, and I wrote all the word out in capital letters except for the I's. The I's, I made them little because I become so little in caregiving,
Right.
and you just get lost in it. And
Right.
My life was about saving Jimmy. That was what I thought I could do. And when it didn't work, that was part of the grief. That was part of the anticipatory grief, is I somehow felt like I failed.
You're helpless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we've had medical stuff. You've had medical stuff. I've had medical stuff. And our partners, there isn't a lot that they can do. It's just that be there for us, bring us soup, take us to the appointments. But now, who is caregiving you now, Lina? That's what I want. I mean, who is there for you during this grief?
I have somehow really latched into Zoom meetings and groups and people and organizations. And even with pandemic being over, thank goodness that we discovered Zoom. And that's where my support is. And a lot of friends that I still text at all hours and get replies. For me, that was a really big tool, is to write out my thoughts on the text or a group email, and then kind of hold my breath and wait for the replies. Like, the replies were really important to me to get that feedback coming back.
Right.
And when I've been in the position the other way, sometimes I don't reply back right away. I'm like, wow, that's really intense. I got to think about that. And it made me realize that if somebody reaches out to you in despair, send them something back. Acknowledge it right away.
Like, think about this, or just something.
Well, no. So if you're grieving and you're texting a friend, I mean, the friend should understand that, hey, maybe I should just say, hey, thinking about you, just I will get back to you more detail. Right, because it's hard to know what to say to somebody who's lost the love of their life.
Well, yeah, and I understand what you're saying, because you're feeling left unopened.
Yeah. And vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you want a lifeline.
Action. Exactly.
You just want someone to acknowledge you, and maybe somebody's got the time to talk a little bit more. Maybe somebody doesn't. You send out, like me, 50 messages. You're going to get a few back, thank goodness. But I found that on the other end, for me to be more responsive to other people. That was one of the lessons that I think I learned in this, is that it's a two-way street.
Right.
When someone reaches out to me, reach out back.
Right.
Because, like in mental health and some of the stuff we've talked about that you went through, is you don't always say exactly what you need.
Right.
You kind of got to read between the lines and give back to the person that's reaching out.
This episode of This Crazy Life is also sponsored by Jaspin IT Consultants. Jaspin is trusted by financial firms, hospitals, and small businesses with over 30 years of experience, specializing in computer repair for PC and Mac, managed IT solutions, managed antivirus, servers, virtualization, networking, surveillance solutions, VoIP phone service, and digital signage. We are building a reputation for creating a positive return on investments for our clients. If you are serious about your business success, our team of professionals can get you there. Strategic thinking, personal attention, competitive prices, real-world results. Discover the Jaspin difference. Located at 249 North Main Street in Bishop, California, 760-872-2797, or on the web at www.jaspin.com. Yeah,
Right.
if you don't get that response, your mind starts to spin. What's going on? What's happening?
Yeah, it is, because in a grief there is a mental health aspect to being right in the grief, and you're in the second year, and the second year is often the more difficult, because the first year is kind of shock and taking care of the business part of somebody dying, and the second year it's like, okay,
The process.
yeah, it's the processing year. They say the second year, your expectation things will suddenly get better one day are not true. There is no linear recovery timeline or stages that you should have worked through by now. Grief is an up and down, messy roller coaster of emotions. And the second year is, there's just no end point. You don't know when it's gonna end.
That is exactly it.
Yeah. And I know sometimes with you, I'll say, hey, leave your cats at home for a night. You just come up and hang out with us for the night. We have a couple of extra bedrooms. Come sit by, and we'll watch a movie. And, and you say no a lot. And I understand that. It's just also important for the friends to realize that the door is going to be opened. Don't stop asking the person who's grieving to come out to dinner, to go and do this. I know it's been hard for you to go to events with a lot of people, especially when there's a band and the guys in the band. That's been, I think you walked out on
Triggers.
triggers.
You don't know what your triggers are going to be. One thing that I have found is I know more of what I can't do than what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going with that. I can't do that. So what can I find to replace it? So I'm not isolating. I can't do big events, but I can do a one-on-one, like an all-girl band.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I'll do that. And find a replacement instead of trying to duplicate what you used to be able to do that is just impossible now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And your kids have been a big support too.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. I know they come up and down and they stay with you, which is amazing.
Yeah, I was fortunate. My son was able to stay with me for 7 months after Jimmy died. So I was really fortunate, where I have extra sympathy for people that don't have that. That is sort of a luxury that I was very fortunate to have.
Well, a lot of people go back to their lives, and the person who's left grieving is trying to get on with his or her life. And often they don't know how to do that. And often they think they're a burden when they keep reaching out to their friends and family members. And I'm here to say, if you're grieving, man, continue to reach out. And if you know somebody who's grieving, please just say hi, send them a letter, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever it is. There's so many ways to contact people. Yeah, don't isolate, and don't isolate them from your life. A lot of people don't know what to say to somebody who's lost somebody really close. And so they pull back because they don't know what to say. And it's just important to be there.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes you just sit.
Yeah.
You don't have to say anything.
Yeah. I can't.
Either with that person.
Yeah. I wish I could sit in Lina's house, but I am so allergic to cats, and she's got a few. So I went there a few months ago, and I brought you some Robertos.
And we sat outside.
and it was lovely.
Yeah. That's something to read.
Yeah, she does. Lina's an amazing writer. So she's writing a book about her life with Jimmy, and we asked her to bring something to read.
It's a memoir on the 2 years of the medical journey and the roller coaster, and a little bit of what I shared today, and then has a lot of backstory on how we met and why it was as amazing as he was. I call it my Jimmyisms. And I just trying to put my thoughts down, and Stacey said, go ahead and bring something that might be fun to read and give you a little idea of kind of who Jimmy was and his sense of humor. This is throwing us at Stanford when we first got there. The first thing that caught my attention was the wall of business cards to the right of the receptionist. I had never seen this many medical providers so prominently displayed. Row after row, the stark white cards with the maroon Stanford logo announced dozens of head and neck specialists. Flabbergasted at the variety of choices and elaborate designations, I just stared. Reconstructive, oncological, department chair, director this, head honcho that. Much to my surprise, I noticed that one thing all these business cards had in common. The obscenely obvious had not occurred to me. We were at a cancer institute. What? What are we doing at a cancer institute? I was truly mystified, apparently in the deepest throes of unrecognizable first stages of denial. Jimmy doesn't belong here. Surely this is a mistake. Reno should have taken us somewhere else, right? But all of a sudden, I flashed on all the directional signs we'd already passed by, scattered throughout the facility. They all said cancer center, with arrows pointing to radiology and infusion centers. Panic and fear shot upward, and I felt uneasiness creep in, and I whispered, I have to sit down. I stumbled to the closest chair and collapsed into the hard plastic, and within seconds, Jim was at my side, with a box of tissues and a bottle of water. What is up with you? He asked, unaware of my sudden realization of our reality. I gulped, not sure what to tell him. Had he come to the same conclusion? Hey, baby doll, I am all checked in, he said, and you missed it. They asked me what I was here for. And what'd you say? I said, tilting my head and meeting his eyes. He grinned mischievously. There's a rumor of a tumor, and I've lost my sense of humor.
Thank you so much, Lina, for sharing that. Thank you so much for being a guest on This Crazy Life, because you have had a crazy, crazy journey. We so appreciate you being here very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Lina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This Crazy Life with Stacey Powells
And Jason Brown. And our guest, Lina.